Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven. I'm your host, J.F. Garrard, and today we have a special guest, Peter Tchaikovsky. So Peter is the creator of the award-winning webcomic Rock, Paper, Cynic, the crowdfunding sensation, the story engine deck of writing prompts, and 6 books of comics and short stories. He has twice won the Aurora Award for the best graphic novel from the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association. His fiction, game writing, and poetry have appeared in the award-winning tabletop RPG Emberwind, the video game Fractor, and publications like Best Canadian Poetry, Best Canadian Speculative Writing, Globe and Mail, Asimov Science Fiction, and more. His comics, memes, and social media shenanigans have been covered by Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, Entertainment Weekly, BuzzFeed, Newsweek, and The Huffington Post. His latest project is the Story Engine Lore Masters Deck, a deck of lore weaving prompts for writers, world builders, and game masters. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so looking at your bio, you seem to do a bit of everything. So can you tell me a little bit about how you started your creative pursuits and how it led to this?
I have always loved sort of writing and storytelling and sketching and drawing, and I've been very attached to looking at, I guess, how creative lessons learned from different types of media, like doing poetry or drawing or whatever, can be transliterated to like other mediums. So I've always loved like what happens if you wrote comics, but you paid attention to the line breaks like it's a poem. Or what happens if you look at the way that comic panels are laid out and the way that comic pages have a certain pacing to like when new action starts and when the action cuts. What if you tried to apply those lessons to like the pacing of writing an action scene with just text, or the pacing of a poem and stanza breaks. So I think I've always been a little bit obsessed with genre and form and medium and how you can cross apply those lessons, and also what things the different media have in common, like what things are universal about what makes a story satisfying, whether it's a comic or a short story or a long story or a novel or a movie or whatever. So I started out doing like a bunch of different types of creative writing. Like my first publication credits were short stories in like Canadian literary magazines and poems. And I very quickly realized that I have a kind of like a roving mind that likes to jump and sink its teeth into a bunch of different creative media. So at the same time, I started doing sort of short comics, most of which were very like joke driven. I'm not a very good visual artist. I can really only I can draw well enough to execute a joke that I write to the level of my strength as an artist, but I can't just draw anything. So I spent a lot of time learning how to do like how to tell a joke in a visual medium. Eventually, I shifted to doing some what I call like postcard fiction, which are microfiction short stories, really short stories arranged as a postcard. Sort of as I began to develop a little bit of a name online, because a lot of these projects I was posting online for people to read for free, I started getting invitations to work for to do some writing for tabletop RPGs like Emberwind. I got to come on board and help design their sort of branching narrative system for their tabletop RPG. They have campaigns that don't require a dungeon master or a game master to run. They're like self-running campaigns, and getting to work with the team on how to develop that, how to write a self-telling story was a lot of fun. I got invited actually through poetry to do writing for the video game Fractor, which was a lot of fun, trying to write poems that encapsulate the theme of like a platformer video game, and that also give a hint as to how the puzzle in that level is supposed to be solved, and it has to rhyme. Was like the poet brain had so much fun taking on that challenge. And just like I guess different opportunities led to one another, and then it was eventually through writing so much microfiction and starting to think about like how many parts of a story can you remove and it's still a story? Like at what point does it stop being a story? What's the minimum number of things you need to have? And the story engine deck, this deck of writing prompts, kind of grew out of a couple of experiments I was doing at the time. One with like how much can you strip down a story and it still feels like a story when you read it. And then also looking at like where do story ideas come from. I was trying to write 1 to 2 short stories every week for this site, and doing that just means you need to have a lot of ideas. And you need to be able to experiment with those ideas, and you need to be not too attached to how any one of those stories is going to go. You need to be willing to experiment and play and try something new, just to sort of be able to create that many stories that feel different. and playing around with different elements, like what if I substitute this character for this character, or like what if I tried flipping this character's motivation, or what if I tried changing the setting, or doing a really setting-driven story where it's not really about the character, it's about the setting. Playing with those elements is really what led to the story engine deck, which is very much a deck where you can like play out cards and play around with which elements you want to use. You can rotate a card and change who the character is, or change what their motivation is, or change what the conflict is. And it was really fun getting to look at story structure and story shape and story permutability, how you can change, interchange, and switch around elements and explore the options of the story, and kind of see where it takes you. So that was kind of the arc of how it all fit together.
Yeah, I remember, I think we first met at one of the conventions. I don't know if it was at Astra or was it Anime North? No, maybe it was at Astra. And I think
It
there was
was at
another one in
Astra.
Kitchener. I think I saw you in Kitchener one time too, or Guelph. I don't remember. One of the smaller
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's that one called?
Genre Con?
GenreCon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is it still there? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Post-pandemic, everything's changed.
yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been to that many cons, like, post-pandemic, but maybe one day. So like back then you were doing web comics, and then now you switched to, okay, let's back up for a minute. So Story Engine, it's almost like a board game, right? Like it's physical paper
Yeah.
cards. So why did you decide to do that instead of like a digital medium for Story Engine?
It started off as like a personal preference thing where like when I plan tasks, when I brainstorm ideas for stories, I need it to be non-digital. I think that, and like sometimes I do, like there's a lot of things that I do like to do digitally when I'm ideating, like poetry. I really like writing on a computer because you can instantly play around with line breaks and reposition things. I think that's really helpful. But for those initial concepts, I really like being able to just free flow on paper. And what I especially like, and especially this is like how I organize my task boards, is I like being able to put things in a place temporarily. Like I like being able to temporarily commit to a creative decision or a placement or a relationship between things that I'm thinking about or working on, and then to have the freedom to move them around later. And I think a lot of people do this with sticky notes, where like you put a bunch of sticky notes on a wall and you've tried got you got your plot outline, or you've got your character map. But I really wanted to have a deck system that was fluid enough that you could, without having to do sticky notes that lose their stickiness or that fall off, where you could physically map out a story in like physical space, and play around with the ideas that way, and where you could again temporarily commit to a choice, like, okay, this is going to be the character for now, but I can change that later. And where it was really easy, just like tactily, to go and swap that card out for a different card, or rotate that card and change which of the cues or the character suggestions on it that you were going to use or be active. I liked that a lot, and I do think there's something to like if you just think about the human brain and body, like we are designed to be creatures who operate in physical space. Our systems are wired for us to be able to like hold things and handle things, and we pay more attention to things that we can feel and touch and see. It just happens. And attention is kind of the attention is like literally focus, and it also becomes memory later, right? The things that we're paying attention to now are things that we can remember later. And I do feel like you end up with a richer and deeper interaction with the cards, because of the fact that you're like paying attention to them in physical space, you're operating and moving them, and like later when you think about the prompt, you'll actually be able to picture those things in that space because of the ways that you've interacted with them. And I think there's a lot to that that's beneficial. And I also know, especially like I love when kids use the deck, and I know that kids especially like love to be hands-on with it. Like the more it feels like an activity and like a game, like you say, the more I think that it just clocks with them that like, oh, these are things that I can play with. These are things that I can change and order, and almost like Legos, like you get to stack them and rearrange them and make what you want out of them. And that clicks really when it's in physical space.
Now, initially, it started as something you did for yourself. Like, when did you decide to do a Kickstarter and mass produce this sort of story engine?
It's funny because the story engine sort of has turned into my full-time career, and that was not an accident, but it was not what I thought was going to happen. But the original story engine Kickstarter launched as I was releasing a new book of those postcard short stories that I've been writing. And at the same time, I was going to launch like, here's this deck that I was playing around with as I was thinking about story structures, and that as I was writing some of these stories. So it was a book of short stories written at the same time as developing the deck, some of which were prompted by the deck. And co-releasing those. And my thought was like, well, my fans will come for the book and then they'll check out the deck and maybe they'll like it. And like 2-3 days into the campaign, it became very clear that there's this like really exciting appetite, and like strangers, people who'd never heard of my short stories before and who frankly like didn't care about them, were there like looking at this deck and being like, there's something really interesting and exciting here. I can see how you'd be able to use this. So on like day 2 or 3 of the campaign, I pivoted to change the headline, and it became about like, here is this deck and also this book that I wrote while working on it. And it was one of those moments of like being willing to accept that the thing that I started off being excited about is not the thing that everyone was excited about. And there's something a little bit humbling in being like, most people don't care about my book. But on the other hand, being willing to accept the gift of like, a lot of people are really excited about the way that I think about stories and are really excited to think about stories in a similar way and experiment with this tool. Like that was a gift that basically has turned into my full-time job and the most fulfilling career I've ever had. So I think that being open to that change and that opportunity was exciting, and it came at a time in my life where I got to discover a whole new aspect of writing that I hadn't really thought about or worked on before, which is writing prompts and writing tools, like writing these open-ended tools that people can use any way they want to build things that is interesting and creative for them. And like there is a fine art to writing prompts and cues, and I found it's like when I work with writers on these decks, which we did with Deck of Worlds, and which we're doing again with Lore Masters deck, writing the style guide, like what I think will make for a good cue for another writer to write, is always a really interesting challenge. Like having to explain like, how do you write something that's specific enough that it's interesting and there's a hook, but that's open and broad enough that there's room for the person who's using it to interpret it and bring their own ideas and their own interpretations and really make it shine. It's a little bit almost like what's this, sort of like button soup or stone soup, where like someone says like, we're going to make a soup as a community. I'm going to bring this button. Anyone else have any ingredients? And if each person brings an ingredient, or if in this case it's like the user brings a bunch of ingredients or interpretations or things, by the end you have a soup and you started with nothing. And very much that's how the prompts need to be written, is like a little button that gets the person to start adding their own ingredients and their own interpretations. And that's kind of where the magic happens.
Was it offered as like a bonus to your story? Like if someone bought your stories at a certain level on the Kickstarter, you got the deck? Was that how originally how it was?
There were tiers for both the
Yeah.
book and for the deck separately, and there were various tiers for like in both or just this one. And very quickly it became either everyone wanted just the deck or the deck and the book. A few people were there just for the book. Like I do have there were a lot of people, and still are a lot of people, who follow my microfiction. But that was kind of the following that I've been slowly building over. I think at that point I'd been running that project for 2 years, maybe 3. So it was those followers who were on board to kind of just for the stories, but very quickly, like the larger crowdfunding people who are interested in what's going on in crowdfunding, and especially a lot of writers, and then a lot of tabletop role-playing game, like game masters, dungeon masters, got very excited about this. And also, one thing that was very cool is to see the community start to come up with their own ideas for how to use the deck. So like in the guidebook that comes with it, I published, here are different formats of prompt, almost like how you can do different spreads with tarot cards. You can do different kinds of spreads. You can come up with a suggestion for like a character focused prompt. I just want to know who this character is. You can have sort of a story seed. You could have 2 characters in conflict, or 1 character who's divided between 2 different things that they want. You can have an object or location focused prompt to create a setting. It was a very versatile tool. And then seeing people come up with their own prompt formats and start to share those with each other, or like look at ways that they're going to do this to like reinvent aspects of their D&D campaign or their book, like seeing it really take on a life completely outside of what I had planned for it was just like amazing. It was a very mind-blowing moment.
So what were some of the challenges to actually making this deck? Did you have to, was it a challenge to find like a manufacturer or anything like that?
I had worked with a lot of book printers, but I'd never worked with like a manufacturer, which is what I needed for this. So it was my first time like having to figure out like, how do you design a game box, and how big should it be compared to the components, and how much should it be organized in such a way that that like people can store cards in different pots, or do they just want them? Like I spent so much time worrying about like, how do people want to physically interact with this? And in the end, I was really happy with how the box turned out. Some of the suggestions came from being open to and collaborating with the manufacturer, the factory, like having them make suggestions about like, we think this would be a good way to organize these, and getting on calls and physically trying to build things out of cardboard that would look like how I want the hinges to work. So that was definitely a challenge. another one was like just trying to figure out how do you structure, um, or if you were going to make a Lego set that you can build any kind of story out of, what are like the 5 brick types that you need to be able to make it work? I was trying to, I think that there's a lot of fun story prompts out there and other prompting systems, but one of the challenges that some of them run into is that they can be very closed. So rather than them being an open invitation to like interpret this how you want or build your own prompt, it's very like execute this idea and do your own take on it, which means that they're not as reusable and there's less room for the writer to like find themselves or make their own space in it. And trying to figure out like how do you come up with a story prompt system that feels open, that feels flexible and reflowable and reusable and remixable and customizable. That was really hard. Like, what are the essential elements of a story that you need to have there to be able to construct a story kit out of was challenging, and it took a lot of like drafting and redrafting and redrafting. And eventually I got there and I was like very, very happy with it. And the thing that I found was like the simpler the system was, the better it worked. And the less I was trying to do writing for the writer and I was just letting the writer do their own writing or their own creating or ideating, the better and more useful it got. So like the learning how to get out of the writer's way basically was probably the hardest part and letting the writer be the person who's being creative and being inventive.
Okay, so you're about to launch a new Kickstarter. So what is the difference? Well, I guess what are you adding to the story engine with this new Kickstarter?
Yeah, so the Lore Masters deck is a deck of lore prompts that kind of combines 2 of my favorite aspects of the story engine deck and then of its sequel, Deck of Worlds, in its own sort of standalone format. So story engine had something that was really cool that I liked, where you could take a character and give them a motivation and there's some kind of conflict, and you could attach that motivation to, say, another character or a location or an object. So you could sort of map different and asymmetric relationships between like characters and places and things. And I really liked that connectivity, and I found that so much interesting story material emerged from those connections that you'd see. And then the thing I liked about Deck of Worlds is that it got a little bit more granular with the types of cues that we were writing. Story Engine is very open-ended and very general, which is good for sort of these larger story archetypes, but it's less helpful for, say, like building a world where you want to get a little bit more in depth and think about like who lives in this world, who are the stakeholders, who holds power, who wants change. All these sorts of questions are things that we just couldn't map in the Story Engine deck. We couldn't reflect that, but that became a really fun aspect of a deck that's designed to help structure without limiting an act that's as like creative, but also as like varied as world building, because world building can mean like a million different things. Like, are we talking about fashion or hair or food or belief systems or politics? Are we talking about just like buildings and architecture? There's so many aspects to it. So trying to give a little bit of structure to that and getting to be granular was really fun. Lore Masters deck does both of those things, and it does it rather than mapping locations in space, it maps relationships between different elements of lore. So there's a deck of factions, which we've never had before, a deck of figures, which are similar to kind of the agents and the character types from the Story Engine deck, but with a different focus on how each card is balanced in terms of having a variety of cues. There are event cards, which is new for us. We've never had like event-focused cards. There are locations, which are similar to some of the aspects of the Anchors deck and Story Engine and some of the landmark cards from the Story Engine deck. And then we have objects, we have materials, we have a creatures deck, so you can create like species, monsters, and creatures for the first time, which is a lot of fun. And then there's a wild card aspect deck, which lets you apply different aspects or like descriptors to other cards, so you can give them a bit more like personality. And what I love is that you'll start with like one little seed. You'll pull a faction card, and maybe it's a guild. You'll pull a few secondary prompts to describe this guild, and you'll end up with like a few, like maybe a background for it, a couple of traits for it, and then an agenda for them, like a motivation that they have. You'll end up with that this guild was founded so long ago that no one remembers how it was founded. That's your background. You'll draw another card that says that the guild is known for their infighting. You'll draw another one that says that one of their traits is that they have, let's say, they control a very powerful artifact. And then you'll have another one that says that they have a huge stockpile of a particular material resource. what's cool is that those little prompts for the artifact and that little prompt for the material both have an icon that says like this card could link to an object card from the object deck. So you'll start with this little seed, you'll give it a few details, and then you'll add, okay, well, what's the object? What's the artifact that they control? And you'll add what's the material they have a resource pile of. You'll pull those cards, you end up with 2 more little nodes in your web. Each of those, you draw some cards to describe it, and all of a sudden that object is being housed in a secret location. Well, what's the location? You get to pull a location card, you flesh it out. Well, that location was the site of a pivotal battle that changed the landscape of this world. What are the details of the battle? You pull out an event card. And so you can just focus on building one element of lore at a time. If all you want to do is come up with a cool idea for a faction, you can do that. But if you're open to exploring those connections and those dynamic relationships like the story engine deck did, where you can have like a motivation that connects one person to another, you can now have that interconnectivity, but you can do that between not just characters, but between factions, characters, events, locations, objects, materials, creatures. We also have expansions for like deities. You can get the gods can become involved in the affairs of mortals. And you can build this really fun, interesting, interconnected tapestry where every piece of it matters because it's connected to another piece, whether by backstory or current agenda or current traits. There's always something that makes each of these elements matter in your world. And so rather than having that kind of everything in the kitchen sink form of world building, where like, here's a bunch of ideas I had that have nothing to do with each other. All of your ideas are connected. All of them hold meaning relative to one another. And I think the thing that I have found is that the creative process almost becomes like seeing an ecosystem evolve, because that guild that we talked about might suddenly take on a whole new personality when we find out who their enemies are. If you have a connection card that connects them to another faction that's their enemies, all of a sudden this guild stands for something different than they would have if you didn't have another element to contrast it with. Or by setting their headquarters in a particular location, now there's just like a different vibe. Maybe that guild will suddenly feel a bit more culty because they're like the location that they live in is like an old abandoned cathedral. And I just love that by getting to put these cards next to each other and see how they talk to each other, you get all of these resonances and depths and surprising results that you wouldn't have if you were just exploring each of them on their own. And interconnectivity, I think, is really the secret sauce that makes the new deck work and that makes it feel so different. That, and again, getting to be a bit more granular with rather than having general cues where like we have to be able, this card needs to be able to describe a character or an object like we had in the story engine deck. The descriptors, we have a combination of generic ones and then also really specific ones that flesh out, like for a character, let's talk about like what are their speech mannerisms, what do they wear their hair like we can get a bit more specific about characters in a way that we haven't gotten to yet. Same thing with factions, same thing with events. So we get to really ask questions and draw attention to creative aspects of these that will make them feel like specific and real and tangible. And that was a lot of fun.
Well, listening to you, like I've tried using like story cubes and stuff like that, but those are very basic. So what you're describing is actually quite detailed. And I think, well, I hope it'll help people write, help them plan their stories better. Although writing is still an art. So hopefully, they'll put time into perfecting their craft as they get the backbone, at least with the story engine. So they can work on the words. Now, what are some of the rewards in this new Kickstarter? Like, can you get the story engine along with the lure? Is that one of the options? Like for people that don't have story engine?
Yeah, absolutely. So there, you will be able to get the old decks and to pre-order those. We also have them available immediately on our website, which is storyenginedeck.com. And if you want to just try it out, we always have a free demo available for download. You can download a third of the deck in like a printer-friendly paper format and print it out.
Oh my God, how much printer paper are we talking about?
It depends on which format you download in. I do have a very eco-friendly version that fits 12 cards to a page. But if you want like the full size fancy version, it's 6 cards to a page and the deck's 180 cards, so it can be quite a few pages. But a lot of the time people won't print it out, they'll download it, they'll see the cards so they have a sense of how they're going to work, and then they make that decision. But I want this to be a tool that people who get a benefit from it will get to use. And if it's not going to fit your writing style, I don't want someone to like order a deck that's not going to be good for them. So I like to have those demos available for people to try out. And so you can order the old deck through the campaign or through the website. And another sort of fun aspect of the Lore Masters deck is that you can mix in cards from the story engine and from Deck of Worlds to add like additional potential combinations and material. So Lore Masters deck is, I think it's 90% new material. There's maybe 10% of like, we reused some really strong cues from other card types. Like our agent deck from the story engine deck some of those same cues appear in Lore Master's deck, because we did really want to be able to represent certain types of character archetypes, like a student or a healer. Those are like really important, essential things that we didn't want to avoid just because we had included them in something else. But I think it's something like 90% new material. And if you want to pull on your prompts from the story engine for Deck and Worlds, we have a little guide for how to pull those cards in and use them to like have even more combinations, how to have those decks talk to each other a little bit more. And then we also have some really fun expansions coming out. There's going to be a deities expansion for coming up with gods and gods' relationships to various aspects of the world, along with like other types of spirits and supernatural entities. There is going to be an emblems deck, which is a deck just full of iconography and symbols that you can use, so that you can suddenly give heraldry to a particular figure, or like a sigil that they use or associated with. You can give an emblem or a banner to a faction. You can have like the symbol that's engraved into the hilt of a sword, or you can figure out like, what does the coin in this area look like. So those are really fun for getting to like visually map out more parts of your world, or visually think about how it would look. And also for people for whom like that visual medium is more creatively stimulating, it gives a little in for that. We're working on also, this is a deck that I really, really love. I was trying to find a way to include this in the main deck, and I just couldn't make it. There'd be too many card types, but it's a namesake deck, which basically gives you unfinished titles or nicknames for things that the cards that you draw from the other decks complete. So you might draw this, and like it's the prefix name laughing, and then you draw say a deity card, and the card, the cue that you've drawn for your deity is like devil. So you have the laughing devil, and your goal is to try and figure out why does it have this nickname and how does that work. And I find that like how things get named, or what nicknames things earn, is very evocative. And I like it because it also lets you think in terms of the world of your lore, like how do people in this world think about this god or think about this faction. A lot of that is communicated by the nickname it's known by. So I'm really excited for the namesakes deck, and having this deck that lets you apply really interesting evocative lore-based nicknames to all kinds of different things, to artifacts and to materials and to species as well. So looking forward to that. We're looking at doing our first journal, so that is a way to like document your lore prompts and group together pages of that are connected in the same world. And we are looking at doing some new storage boxes. Those are the main things. There's a few others that we're still finalizing, but we should have that final list ready for launch.
Very, very cool. I was going to ask you about the future, but it sounds like you'll be expanding it much more in the near future. Okay, so we're going to see how this works. So you'll do a bit of a demonstration. So
Yeah,
I'm
let's
looking
do it.
forward to that.
So this is the Lore Masters deck. I have an alpha copy of. This is like early preliminary material. So this is none of this is final. This is like a sort of a test copy. And I've put it in one of the story engine storage boxes, and we'll do a card draw here. So I recommend starting by drawing a faction card. Now every card is double-sided. So the front side has what I call primary cues, which are like really basic. It's like, what kind of faction is this? And the back side has these more specific cues that will describe the main card once we've decided on a primary cue. So to start out, yeah, let's go ahead and pick one of these cues. So we could make our faction.
Sorry. Let me ask. Do you need the story engine deck to use the Lore Masters deck, or can you use them separately?
Totally standalone. Yeah, it's totally standalone. Yeah, and this box says story engine. It is just a storage box. Inside, the only thing I have here is the Lore Masters deck. So every card you see will be from Lore Masters deck. So we can make our faction a heterodoxy, a horde, a dominion, or a team. What would you like to go with?
Let's do what is a heterodoxy?
A heterodoxy, I think, is a faction movement within a religion that that has its own series of like beliefs, belief systems that are counter to the main religion.
Okay, let's do that one.
All right, we're gonna do heterodoxy. Then I'm gonna draw another faction card, and we're gonna pick one of these 4 cues to tuck under our heterodoxy to describe it. So the cues are linked to a conspiracy about an event, run by a council, I'm reading these backwards on my screen because it's mirrored, so I might just tilt it so I can see it, not backwards. Linked to, by council. Their agenda is to unleash a monster on the world, or they have a trait that they worship a specific aspect of or avatar of a deity.
Oh, let's do the monster.
Ooh, love it. Okay, so you'll see here that on the monster queue, we have a, let's get it in focus, there we go. On the monster queue, there's another icon, which is for the creature type of card. So this is going to connect to another card. It's going to connect to a creature. So I'm going to put that right there. And right now, because we have that icon, it tells us that we're going to draw a quick secondary queue here. So we're going to decide what the creature is. It can be, oh, we have to do Corvid. This is the Artsy Raven podcast, so I think we have to choose Corvid. But
Okay.
Corvid, it could be a songbird, it could be a kelp, like it could be like they're trying to unleash a monstrous seaweed that'll spread across the ocean, or it can be an elemental.
Okay, Corvid.
All right, so they're trying to unleash some kind of Corvid on the world. And we have some kind of crow or raven cult, and I love that. I love raven everything. All right. So we're going to do another cue for the faction here. So we've got that it was founded on a whim or a dare, that they are prone to nepotism, that they have an agenda to dismantle a system or institution, and that would connect to another faction card. So which faction are they trying to dismantle, which institution or system? Then we have a trait here that they can augur the future using a specific material, and to flesh that out, we draw another material card.
Oh, how about the future one?
All right, so we're going to do auguring the future. So I'll put that on this side and we'll tuck that under. Boop. And we are also going to now draw a material card. So can they augur the future using horn, sap, meat, or a rock?
I guess rock.
Yeah, I like the idea of like maybe like casting rune stones or
stones.
Yeah, or every now and then, I think there's some kind of mancy in real life lore where like the way that something breaks is supposed to give you an information about the future. So it could be like you shatter a stone, you look at the pattern of the break and decide where. Cool. All right, we're gonna do another one. They could have the trait that they're highly secretive. They could be master trainers of a particular type of creature. They could have an agenda to defeat another faction, or they could be founded on different principles than they operate on today.
Oh my gosh. About against another faction.
Sweet. I like they're assembling some kind of like raven army to defeat their enemies. All right, is that other faction going to be a nation, a reserve, a cult, or a gang?
It has to be a nation, I think. Bigger.
Okay. So taking down the system, taking down the nation. And then we'll draw one last one here. And they can have a background where they are linked to a war crime. They can have a confusing or complicated constitution. They can consider a specific location to be sacred, or they can lobby for a specific political or social issue.
Probably the political issue if they're taking down a nation, right?
Yeah. So we don't have to decide yet what that issue is. And in fact, I think if we want to expand on the nation, we could learn a little bit more about what they're against, which will tell us what they're for. So the next step, we could just leave it at this and go from here and do some writing and ideating, or we can expand our lore web a little bit. So would you want to learn more about either the Raven, the Rock, or the Nation?
Let's do the nation.
To the nation. All right, and we'll stop after 2 here, but we can do a little bit more expanding. So when you expand a prompt, this is where you get to start drawing on the wild cards. So wild cards, they look like this, and they have they're double-sided to only have those secondary prompts, like the light side prompts, and you can pick from any of the 8. So this nation can be welcoming, majestic, loving, diplomatic, rigid, dappled, acrimonious, or refreshing.
Rigid.
Rigid. I like that because it's, again, we're fighting the system here. And so when you expand a card, you rotate it so that the cue that you want to use is facing you. So you only ever have to pay attention to the word that is facing you. The words that aren't on those primary cards, you can just ignore. And then to help you remember how your lore web grew and expanded, you'll always know that you started with the card that has 4 secondary cues around it. and then you can follow these arrows on the wild cards out from that card to see how it expanded. So those two arrows say, hey, it went from here to here. You can actually like follow and remap your lore web's growth and reverse engineer it, and it helps you sort of follow your own thinking when you return to look at the prompt you made. So we have a rigid nation, and then we're going to draw a couple more secondary prompts for that. So the nation can believe in the rule of the strong. They can have a background where they have a doctrine or founding principles that are inspired by a type of creature. They can have an agenda to resolve a bitter leadership struggle, and we could draw a figure card to figure out who the leader is. Or they can operate by a strict code.
Oh, let's do the leader one.
Love it. All right, and then we'll quickly draw a leader card to figure out who that is. So is that leader a defender, a mariner, an inspector, or a poet involved in this leadership conflict?
Oh gosh, I guess a defender.
A defender. It's starting to feel like maybe a military nation, so that would make sense.
Yeah.
Or a very militaristic nation, like it's got that rigid kind of military vibe. All right, just two more cards here, and then we'll be done our little lore web of two. Is this nation, are they keepers of predictions or prophecies? Do they have an agenda to guard or capture an animal, spirit, or deity? Which would be really interesting because they could be like, they could have an agenda to stop that corvid. They could be very bad at public relations, or they can be experts at harvesting or working with a particular material.
Well, let's do the capturing the creature.
Sweet. And if we wanted to, this is like a bonus mechanic. I try to keep the demo simple, but I always get excited about the extra features. A little bonus mechanic that I love is you can tuck two aspects at the same time by putting that at a diagonal. So we could have that they're very bad at public relations, which I'm interested in because they're a military nation that just has a very bad rep for being like, for these shows of force and violence. And then we can also have our capture an animal, spirit, or deity, and they are the ones who are trying to stop our corvid. And that would be a 2-card prompt. And from here, we could continue if we wanted to, like pull out that defender, figure out who this leader in the leadership struggle is. We could learn more about the corvid and its traits and properties. We could learn more about this rock and maybe find out about what other properties it has or why it helps them augur the future. And you can spin out from there. And if at any point you're like, yeah, you know what, I want to change that agenda, you just pull the card out. You can either rotate it to a different prompt, or you could draw in a whole new card. It's a very fluid system that becomes very easy to like rejig and play around with. But it's just a fun way to like get you started, get your more playful, creative brain engaged in writing before the editor brain wakes up and starts telling you like, no, it's a bad idea. And it moves the starting line for being creative up much earlier, so that you can get to the part where you're creating and building the material that you're going to write with.
Oh gosh, it's almost like maybe you could sell like a blank journal for people to write down stuff as they go on, or if someone messes up their cards.
That's where we're definitely looking at how can we come up with a really good journal for supporting the different types of prompts that people can write, and making sure that like all the linked cards can be together in the same set of entries. So we're playing around with ways to do that. The other thing that we're working on is I shouldn't show this because this is not what the final is going to look like, but this was like the first prototype of our little token set, where if you wanted to show like a connection between two cards outside of just these, you can do these little, leave yourself a little trail of breadcrumbs, laying out a little physical connection between like, here's the, oops, wrong color, between the corvid and the defender, or between the heterodoxy and the nation.
Okay. Very cool. So when is your Kickstarter running?
So we're actually trying out a new platform called BackerKit, which has been previously like a pledge manager for helping people manage their pledges after they run a Kickstarter, has launched their own crowdfunding platform. And I really like a lot of the features, and I think that they're being really, really good about listening to creators and what features creators want for their crowdfunding. So we are going to be one of the earlier projects that are launching on their new platform. And it'll be running from June 20th until July 21st. So just a little over a month that people can go and check that out. And if you go to storyenginedeck.com/lore, that'll redirect you to the BackerKit page.
Okay, and yeah, we'll put a link in the podcast notes for people to follow. So thank you very much, Peter, for spending time with us. And it sounds like an awesome product. So I hope that the people that are writers or storytellers, would be interested in playing around with this. And you had mentioned children. Like, were you demonstrating this at schools, or?
I have not gone into schools to demonstrate it, but we in our first campaign, because it surprised me the scope that it took on, I needed to make up a lot of stretch goals very quickly. And I ended up deciding, because so many educators were emailing me about it because they thought this would be really great to use in creative writing classrooms, I decided to just, one of the big stretch goals that we kept returning to was, let's make some more copies available to educators for free. And we plan to return to that model of making some of these kits available for schools for free. So we've just always had a very good relationship with educators. We always release a set of lesson plans that make it really easy to integrate the deck into the classroom. We've made free PDF decks available to educators to use if they want to be able to integrate it in their classroom. So we're going to keep on going with that and making this tool available. This one, because it's a little bit more complex and there's a little bit more technique to how you use it, I think we might have a little bit higher of a grade that we're aiming for like what student is this ideal for. But again, with all of our decks, the first thing in the guidebook, it's not a rule book, it's a guidebook, because there's suggestions, not like firm rules. And the first like rule, so to speak, is that you can change any rule or guideline that isn't helping you create and that isn't serving your creative purposes. And I have found that like kids are really good at just like picking up the cards, looking at them, and then kind of like with Lego kits, where like they'll look at the box, they'll look at the Lego, and they'll just build what they want, and it's way cooler than like whatever was on the box. They'll often do that anyway. So I'm very excited to see like if you just hand this kit to a kid with no instructions, what do they build with it? And it's always fun. It's always fun to see.
Okay, well, good luck on your campaign. And once again, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarage.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.